Welcome to Perspectives from the Void.
If you're going to make this decision, at least know that. At least know that this is the right decision. I mean, in a destructive culture, people get self-destructive.
Having that autonomy of yourself needs to not be housed in whether or not you are mentally typical.
There are some people like battling mental illness and it's not getting better, and they want help from a professional, but they can't since they're deemed
mentally ill.
Right, yeah, just incompetent, cognitively impaired.
The topic we'll be talking about today is called Euthanasia. You know, so I guess what I know is that
They'll never know why we're laughing.
Or like
Exactly.
a clear definition of euthanasia that I know is that, someone who is on like medical hospice or who's like on the verge of dying, and they're willing to make the choice to die instead of fighting to hold on the machine or in the hospital. And it's not legal in every state, as far as I know. I don't know if it's even legal in all states or not. So is there any like general thoughts that we have on this to start unpacking?
Well, I think that euthanasia is really good for some people. I think that it can be really bad for other people because, like, in some countries, euthanasia is legal, and they even let like people who have mental depression or something like that decide if they want to get euthanized. And I feel like when it comes to mental issues, even if it's not real hardcore issues like schizophrenia or something, even if it's just depression, I don't know if we should leave something like ending your own life in somebody who has that type of mindset. I don't know if we should leave that in their hands.
Okay.
I feel like coercion in that sense can sometimes become extremely devastating in this, because personally I think euthanasia, if properly performed and monitored and checked for coercion and shit like that, I think there's something that we should do as somebody who wants to, in their right mind, it's not just some spur of the moment thing, exit the pain that they're in. I think it's humane to do it. We see it in movies where somebody walks up and shoots them when they're like dying and like, I put them out their misery. Sure. But I think that the coercion of that is like, what if there's someone who can't really properly consent to it, or if they've been talking to someone who's been twisting their mind in certain ways.
Right.
That could be like abusers, that could even be like doctors who don't, or like psychologists don't know like a lot of the safeguards to be there. And so I think there is some gray area, but I don't think that gray area means that we shouldn't have euthanasia as a thing in certain situations.
I was listening to this philosophy podcast, and it was talking about, they called it medical consent. That was the main issue, was that they said that mentally ill people aren't competent to make a decision to like kill themselves, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it does.
And there was backlash because there's a guy who works for people who are terminally ill, like for like 6 months, and helps them in like dying or some type of hospice, and he gets letters from people who are like not in hospice, and they're like suffering really bad and they want to end their life, but there's this weird gray area.
I think it's interesting that I heard that if you attempt suicide, which is technically a different topic but related, I think, it's punishable almost because your body is the property of the government. So the government can put you in a mental institution because they own you and because you do not have autonomy over your body to the extent that you can end your own body, which I think is interesting. I also think when it comes to what you were talking about, the interesting part about that, the difference between schizophrenia and depression is still long-term. While I don't think anybody can make like a snap decision to end it, I do think that over time you can come to this conclusion, and having that autonomy of yourself needs to not be housed in whether or not you are mentally typical.
When you said that, like, you can go to, like, somebody can be held accountable if somebody tries to commit suicide because your body is the government's property, Like, is that for every country, or is that just for some
That's
countries?
America.
Oh, in America, that's just America.
Yeah.
Oh wow. But another thing I wanted to say is earlier I said that I don't think you should be able to decide whether you should end your own life if you have schizophrenia. But just thinking about it, I did watch a documentary about a girl who has schizophrenia, and she was upset because she's like, nobody understands what I go through on a day-to-day basis. Like, how are they going to tell me that my life isn't bad enough to end my own life? Like, I'm the one who has to wake up and deal with this or whatever.
Yeah.
And so that's why I'm kind of like on the fence about that, because I'm like, yeah, you do have to deal with these things, but I don't know, I don't feel like suicide is a good option. I mean, I guess schizophrenia is permanent, but suicide is permanent too. And I feel like with those type of things, like, some days might be really bad, but some days might be really good too. Like, do you want to give up those possible great days because of these bad ones that you faced?
Last semester or 2 semesters ago, I was taking a class called Medical Ethics. We did the concept of, trying to say this right, euthanasia. And it was this one story about this man. He was living life to the fullest, bachelor or whatever, and he got into this really bad car accident where he had 4-degree burns. So he was in a hospital every day in unimaginable act, and he wanted to kill himself. He tried to kill himself multiple times. The nurses and doctors wouldn't let him. His family, I forgot what they wanted. I think some wanted him to stay alive. Against his own will, some was like, well, if he's suffering, I don't want him to suffer. With his personal autonomy, with his personal choice, the state wouldn't let him do it. And he actually pulled through. He had skin graft and stuff back on. And he actually started doing talks at universities about the concept of euthanasia. And then he said something interesting to the crowd in one of his classes. The student asked him, well, now that you're alive and you're back walking and stuff, are you glad that the doctors kept you alive? And the man was like, well, sure, I'm appreciative to be here, but I still don't like the fact that they didn't respect my choice and my decision. So yes, I'm gonna live the life here now, but I wish they would have let me chose my own fate in that situation.
Tico put up a really good point. We talk about mentally typical in the sense of being neurotypical and mentally stable. That's a very key distinction, because I think that someone who is neurotypical can still consent to it, but I don't think that somebody who's mentally unstable at the moment should consent to it. Because I look at that, at your very worst days, when you're really experiencing mental crisis, you don't see that there is any better days that could ever happen. It's not a possibility. Whether for some people that might be true, for most people it's probably not. You're focused in the moment, what you're feeling in the moment, what you're experiencing that moment, and you're extrapolating that farther. Time is necessary for consenting to this. I feel like this is something that cannot be a snap decision. It cannot just be like, oh, you come in here? Okay, 5 minutes later, we gonna kill you. Bye. Having someone who is trained, having oversight to make sure this person is properly consenting, they know the ramifications where they're doing it, they've had enough time to consider this decision, they know the outcomes, like consenting to the murder of yourself, because it's not always yourself that is making the decision to kill you in 100% of the time. It can be your mind, your mental illness, the hormones in your brain, your serotonin and dopamine levels that are making you feel that you don't want to deal with this anymore.
I have 3 thoughts, but I think I already forgot one of them. My first one is that I think that the desire to kill oneself is always going to register in a normative society as mental illness, irregardless of reasoning. Simply the desire to kill oneself is registered as mentally ill. So if we say that someone who is mentally ill cannot have autonomy over their life like that, it creates That being said, I do understand the difference between going through an episode and static mental health. If you have depression, you do still have ups and downs. Your range of ups and downs is just subatomic. It's just down. It's lower than the average person. So even if you're going through a down episode, you still can have a down episode and still be depressed. But also, I do notice that, and this is my second one that I remembered, I do notice that when we talk about changing your life, it usually requires consultation. Not only in terms of what would happen if euthanasia is an accepted thing, but also in terms of like transgender identities. When someone comes out as transgender and they want to transition, it requires a fair amount of consultation. Like, you have to consult a therapist, you have to consult doc. They make sure that you are making a informed decision, that you are of sound mind and body and are making a decision about your life, right? Because then it will. If not who you are, it will change how you are seen. So, like, externally, it'll change you. So, like, in the same vein, I think that if euthanasia is a thing that we are going to bring into the culture, it would have to have a certain level of consultation.
Yeah,
prior
and now
to.
and that is how it is in Sweden, or one of the countries I was watching a documentary in. Like, I think they said, like, you have to have, like, a full year of counseling, and, like, within that time, like, you can change your mind at any point up until, like, they actually put the needle into your arm, and you have to go through all these types of, like, other things before you can do this or whatever. And you have to have, like, 4 different types of meetings, but, yeah, you got to go through a whole...
The traditional pushback on euthanasia is like, concept of life is sacred. You know, it's important. You want to get one life. Everybody should want to live life, right? Now, that's pretty across the board among all cultures, you know, in that sense, because that's a self-preservation key. So it's so taboo in society. We have individuals, for whatever circumstance, that don't want to live their life, you know, and particularly like in a hospital setting of injury or of like extreme pain. Someone would say, well, they're just being influenced by the pain and suffering. Thus, most people would want to get out of that. But when you think a little bit deeper into it, the influence of you should always want to live life plays a factor in people's judgments on those individuals that's living in those situations. And we rid those said individuals of their own personal autonomy to die with dignity and live with dignity.
Yeah, that's
Exactly.
that's exactly what a guy in the podcast said. He was like, people who are going through mental, like, they feel like they should have the same rights as terminally ill people, like people in hospice and shit, to die with dignity, but they need a doctor's help, because if they try to do it on their own, they might make things worse.
True, and it might not even work.
And non-violent suicide is pretty hard. Yeah, right. And I think that's where that paradox come in from, where like being competent versus being incompetent, and autonomy. And
I really wanted to talk about what Tyshawn was saying about the life being sacred. This idea that life is super sacred, that people want to live, you know, because life,
Right.
vitality, it's something to aspire to. But you wouldn't have life without death. That's the interesting thing. And there are like several cultures who do recognize how sacred death is, as well as how sacred life. And it is a balance. And I think being able to choose one's own death is as powerful as choosing to live. I honestly do think so.
wrote a note that someone said that their desire to end their life is completely irrational.
It can be. And I just think that death has a lot of negative connotations, like a lot of them, but I don't necessarily think it needs to be. I think choosing to be done is fair.
Yeah, because there are some people who are like battling mental illness and like it's not getting better, and they want help from a professional, but they can't since they're deemed
Mentally ill.
right. Yeah, just incompetent, cognitively impaired is another word. I just think it's an interesting paradox.
It becomes sacred, not always just from like what we view it as, but in my mind, what makes it sacred is that there is zero going back. There is zero any other decisions that can happen with this. So it's like, if you're going to make this decision, at least know that.
100% sure.
Yeah, at least know that this is the right decision. I mean, in a destructive culture, people get self-destructive. There are plenty of examples we can go at for this.
Right.
And I think that for something as final as this, someone should be there to act in your best interest. Not even necessarily look at it as like a stop, because I agree that just because you have a mental illness does not mean that you could ever consent to euthanasia. But at least put a pause on it and be like, okay, let's think about this for a little bit. Is this just a moment? Or is this something that's been going on for like a year and it's like, you know what, this is what it is? I think it's a little bit different for people who are transitioning, because people detransition. Not very often, but they do. There is still an option there. It's not a final decision. So I would put that as a little difference. Also, one thing you were saying about competent versus incompetent things, there are a lot of failed suicide attempts where that person may not attempt suicide again, or they will think about regretting their attempt, even if they do it again. Even if they do it again and try to kill themselves in like 3 months, but a month from now they could be looking at it as like, oh, I'm glad that didn't happen.
But buddy, you just said there's no correlation between transitioning gender-wise and this. But like you just said, some people detransition, some people fail their suicide attempt.
But if it's going to be doctor assisted,
their suicides.
Like
So
if it's doctor assisted, right?
Yeah.
If we're talking about it being competent,
Yeah.
the failure rate of suicides when a doctor's performing, it'll probably be like 0.3%.
So.
Well, how does that?
People don't choose to fail their suicides, but you choose to detransition.
Yeah.
So it's not like the people who committed.
Sometimes people don't choose to fail their suicides. No offense, but there's no like there's. This is a dark joke.
After all the shit I say,
Some people don't know how to cut right. Like
yes, look,
Like-
it is down the road, not across the street. I'm telling you,
it's a joke, but like sometimes people literally they're like, I'm gonna slit my, but they don't do it correctly.
But still, the point stands that they didn't purposely try not to kill themselves. And when people detransition, that's them making the decision and be like, okay, I don't want to live this life anymore.
Right.
But when somebody
Well,
feels
people
that
who
their suicide attempt, that's, like they was actually trying to commit suicide, they just did it incorrectly.
And then realize they didn't want to because they continued living. Because a lot of people do it incorrectly and then continue to live their lives. So people could decide not to transition and detransition and continue. Also, fun facts, by the way, you can detransition, but you can't necessarily have the exact body and or social sphere that you had prior to transition.
Yes, agreed.
Yeah.
So like,
You want to be that?
Yeah.
No, I'm just-
I mean, that's the things for like I'd say
be honest.
most
I'm
big
very
decisions that happen in life.
What?
You're never going to get the exact same situation back as before, and so that's why I say that. But there's a difference between not having the same thing back as before, and also like there is no possibility for future decisions at all. There is a distinction that like I would say
there
that,
is
and that's why I would say
definitely
that
a
like for someone who is like trans, like I think non-controversially I can say adult trans people they don't need to have any consultation for that shit. If they want to do it, go for it. I don't think there should be anything there, but I think that if euthanasia is a thing, then that should be something that at least like are you able to consent to this? Maybe you just got like somebody who is an abuser in your life who's just telling you fucking kill yourself, fucking kill yourself, fucking kill yourself, like nonstop, and it's just becoming internalized. It's 40 to 60% higher for non-lethal suicide behavior in women than men. Like that's a separate thing too. That's not like a point adding on to that other one. I'd be interested in seeing like what are those correlations like that make it more higher than that.
Yeah, when those statistics come into play, I do think that that's kind of a I'm kind of scared to actually die type of thing. Because I feel like when men try to commit suicide, they normally go for a more aggressive type of thing.
They get the job done.
But when women do it, they'll like take some pills or try something that's kind of soft or slow.
I always thought
And those
that
are the
was
ones that
weird.
normally fail.
Yeah, those pill ones. It was just,
Yeah, the pills fail often.
Yeah, you just get your stomach pumped. That's not fun.
well, that's if someone finds you.
This is my closing statement.
Yeah.
This is a comment that I wrote down. It said, at some point, grown-ups are going to live with the consequences of their choices. That's the burden of being an autonomous being.
Ooh.
Can you say that again, please?
At some point, grown-ups are going to live with the consequences of their choices. That's the burden of being an autonomous being.
Or die by the consequences of their choices.
Power dynamics are important in everything. Doesn't mean that it's always like good or bad, but it's something that we have to realize is a factor. If we had a truck, kind of like an ice cream truck, but they just played depressing ass music and they just drove by a homeless encampment all day and was like, who wants to kill himself? It's free. Who wants to kill himself? And they just did it over and over. Would that be something that we would be okay with as a society? Because I could definitely see some rich ass people who are their neighbors like, I don't want to deal with these people. Maybe it'll work. Maybe they'll just off themselves and I don't got to deal with them anymore.
Yeah, you just brought up a good point because when the government steps into play and like helps to assist people with suicide, I do think that there probably will be more people trying to commit suicide because they're like, okay, here's a surefire way. Let me just do these steps and then I can be dead for sure instead of taking the chance and then maybe I won't die. So I do think that the suicide rates can possibly go up if we would still incorporate euthanasia.
Here's a dark thought. We are overpopulated.
So maybe that's a good thing.
So
Netflix.
I haven't seen that movie.
most of it really rests with the concept of like personal autonomy. Like if a person has reasonable thought and they're in reasonable pain, it is hard, for the outside object to tell them how to live their experience, like at least ethically. Now, obviously, we have a staple in society where we want to preserve life. Thus, it is good to also have, people who loves you and people who's there for you too, that will speak on your behalf as well, even if it's against your personal self-interest. And it's hard to measure out what is the actually right decision in these moments. I'm gonna end it by saying this. I remember me and my mom, we had a real conversation. We were talking about if we got into a car accident and like if I was a vegetable, or if she was a vegetable, would she want me to pull the plug? And I hope I'm not misquoting my mom. Or I remember her being on the side of like, if it's clear that I'm not coming back, don't keep me like that. And I have adopted that same, feeling. Because, she told me, like, if it's clear that I'm not coming back, she'll pull the plug on me. And I didn't feel betrayed by my mom. I didn't feel thrown away. I felt like when you love someone so much that you're willing to let them go to the next part, so of having to sit in limbo. So I think it is a very personal choice between family members. And so, yeah, my whole thing is it rests in real, like, autonomy, personal decision, but the state overrides that. So that's that. Any last thoughts, comments?
I agree. Last thought, last comment. I also think that it is personal autonomy. I also believe that it is really up to the person and the thoughts and feelings we have on someone's life. Like, who are we to tell someone that they have to live it? Who are we to tell someone that they should end it? Like, same thing. Like, who are we to give that judgment onto another person? Que sera, sera. It will be what it be.
Yeah, that same concept with your mom is what happened with my aunt earlier this year, who passed away.
I forgot about that.
Who chose what?
The family chose to pull the plug because she was like in a coma for like 3 days and it wasn't showing.
My last thought would be that I think that people not wanting other people to commit suicide is a loving act, but it is kind of a selfish act because I feel like death is harder on the people that's left alive versus the people that's actually dead.
Yeah, that's what the funeral's for.
Right. And so I feel like the ultimate sacrifice kind of would be like you pulling the plug on your mom or something. So I think it's more sacrificial to let one of your loved ones go than to let yourself go. Or at least for me, like I feel like it would be harder to like kill one of my loved ones versus killing myself.
Mm-hmm.
That would be my last thought about
Tim,
that.
you have any last closing thoughts or comments or anything?
In a larger way, we value physical pain and mental pain very fucking differently. I mean, you look at anything in our health system, how we treat these things. Mental health is a small sub area of medicine. While it's pretty much in my mind at the same level as physical things, but it just kind of got me thinking. I don't know the correct answer, but if we treat these things differently, I feel like society is more ready for someone in physical pain to kill themselves versus mental pain to kill themselves. And I don't know if that's a correct thing to think or not, but that's just something I'm going to be thinking about.
We're gonna have to circle back.
One
to that
last question for you, bro.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think when it came to your auntie, they waited 3 days, do you think they decided too soon? And if so, why not?
I don't think it was too soon because from what I understand, because my granddad passed away a week before my aunt did. There was a lot going on, but she wasn't showing any signs of improvement. And I don't know the whole story, but that's just from what I understand about the situation, is that there weren't, and it might have been more than 3 days. I don't even know exactly. I don't think it was rushed. So. Because I don't think my family wanted that. in the slightest. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing. We are Perspectives from the Void. And thank you guys for coming.